Michael Winograd.
Seasoned litigations attorney in New York City, serving as a partner at Brown and Rudnick with over 25 years of experience. He has represented large corporations in high-stakes cases across various industries. We're talking Bank of America, Johnson & Johnson, FedEx, Gawker Media. If you've ever wanted to know what in God's name it's like behind the scenes, we're talking maybe fighting against Microsoft and Bill Gates, this podcast is where it's at. This conversation goes deep. We talk about who has the real power, the Mangione case, whether or not conspiracies are even viable within such massive, massive cases with billions and billions of dollars. Not a podcast you want to miss, my friends. Don't forget to check out thewayofwilljohn.com. Check out our Rumble. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and enjoy this podcast, my friends, right after you subscribe and leave us a like. Enjoy the podcast. There's a ton of things, like we were talking beforehand. I don't even know where truly we should start. But you know what is actually interesting? You might want to just give people a general idea of who you are and how you're going to be involved in all the things that we're talking about today.
Sure. So in terms of law, I've been practicing 25 years and I've done predominantly corporate litigation. So any big cases that big companies have, we handle those.
Okay.
I do a fair amount of bankruptcy litigation now in sort of the bigger bankruptcies, the J&J, which is called LTL and now RRT, but the big J&J bankruptcy that's been in the news a lot, and Chesapeake, which bankruptcy, and a lot of the sort of the bigger ones in the country, BlockFi related to FTX. And still a lot of commercial litigation when big companies fight against each other over contracts, over board appointments, over control of the company, things along those lines.
So, I mean, that's also a perfect place to start because big companies fighting over things, there are egos involved and stuff like this. And it's a world, like I was saying before, this is a world that I don't understand. We see it from the outside, and my only reference to lawyers and high end and this, this absolute big things, big stakes and all is Suits. Which is Suits real? Could you say Suits?
So I don't know that I've actually watched. I think I've seen maybe an episode of Suits. I've seen a bunch of them, and some of them are pretty close, and some of them are less close.
All right.
So, but from what I recall about Suits, the environment of being at a big firm is
real.
Sort of somewhat accurate.
Right, but no one could. I couldn't fake the bar, get in.
You can't fake the bar exam. It's funny because when I talk to kids who are going into law, people always say time weeds out all bad memories. And I'll always tell people, which is largely true, but the two things that will never weed out are first year of law school, when you're working 19, 20 hours every day, and the bar exam, studying for the bar exam. Because the bar exam is crushing. The fact is, for most people, if you study hard and you're disciplined about it, you will pass and it won't even be close.
Oh, really?
If a 60 is a passing, you're going to be in the 90s. But if you don't put in 100%, that 90 will drop to a 50 very quickly.
Oh, I see.
So it is a brutal experience. You'll get through it fine.
Okay.
But you can't fake it.
Okay. But yes, going to the egos and stuff like this, you mentioned, and I know this is a strange place to start, but I do have a general idea of where we're going to be going. You mentioned some litigation, some stuff that was going on with Bill Gates, Microsoft, and stuff that you were involved in. I know there's going to be areas where you can't and you can talk, but could you tell me what happened there that was so intriguing? Maybe just set the scene.
Well, so that was the Microsoft. It was involved him in the sense that he was the CEO of Microsoft.
Sure.
Founder of Microsoft.
Yes.
But that was, around 2000, a little bit after the huge Microsoft antitrust trial that was going on.
I remember.
So you had the U.S. suing Microsoft, saying that you guys are acting anti-competitively, and you had the EC in Europe saying the same thing. I was predominantly on the European case, and so before I'll give you sort of background into what was going on then. When we argue as lawyers, you really argue either about the law or about the facts. And so the easiest way to break it down for people, if you think about issues of law, if I tell you you're not allowed to drive a motor vehicle while intoxicated, issues about law come up as to what does it mean to drive? Are you driving if you're sitting at a red light? We all know if you're driving up 6th Avenue at 30 miles an hour, you're driving. What if you're stopped at a red light? Are you driving? What if you're pulled over to the side of the road in an emergency lane? What if you're in a parking spot? And the law, through cases, eventually gives you definitions to address various facts that are before it. And so they'll come up with rules that develop over time that say, okay, well, if you're sitting in the driver's seat and you have an intent to drive, that's driving. And well, if you have the key, do you have the keys in? Are you sleeping? Those are the kinds of questions that are, and those are issues of law. Mm. If you think about issues of fact, it's very simply, all right, we collided while we were driving. You say the light was red. I say the light was green. Who's lying and who is right? And so Microsoft was really a lot of both. The main issue in the US side, which is where Bill Gates got deposed, was an issue of law. What does it mean to be anti-competitive? So everybody knew that if you're a major car manufacturer, if you say every Ford that I sell is going to have a specific, a Pioneer brand radio, that becomes anti-competitive. Because if I control a market and I'm putting in something that I don't have to have in my car, it's not part of the car, I can easily swap it out for anything. What I'm doing is basically using my leverage in the market, because everyone's going to buy a Ford, and kind of forcing a Pioneer radio on all of you. But nobody could figure out what that meant with respect to, for example, selling somebody a software platform like Microsoft Windows that had Internet Explorer as opposed to a different one. So there were questions of law that we were delving in. In Europe, it was a little bit different. In Europe, it was about, and I'll wrap this up, but in Europe, it was about everybody has Microsoft Windows on their computer in front of them. You're designing your servers at the other end so that they're only interoperable, they only work well with Microsoft. So you're kind of forcing everybody to buy Microsoft servers. And what I did in that case is I flew around Europe, literally every country in Europe, to private companies, the biggest companies in Europe, and then every country in Europe to go to public agencies and talk with the heads of IT to show that this just isn't, as a matter of fact, correct. You could have Sun servers that work just fine with Microsoft at the other end. But the Bill Gates anecdote, which is something I talk about in class, at the time, we talked about videos and depositions. At the time, video depositions weren't as common. People were still filming them, but they weren't always playing them in court. It wasn't something that people thought as much about now, where you assume that when you're being videoed in a deposition, it's going to be played in court if it gets that far. And one of the things that people were unprepared about in coaching witnesses beforehand and prepping them was to explain the ramifications of how you act on film. Mm-hmm. And so if you think about it, you could ask me, so tell me, what did you think of the weather yesterday? And if I sit and I think about it, I scratch my head, it becomes suspicious. If you're just reading a record, I could wait 3 minutes before answering you. It just says, what did you think about the weather yesterday? It was great. You lose all of that. Well, Bill Gates, when he was answering questions, this is all public because you can pull up the actual deposition videos online. Bill Gates, very thoughtful, smart guy, thought about each word. Well, you're saying, what did I conclude? Is that the same as believe? And he would think, and he would call out distinctions in words, and then he would think, and he would rock back and forth as he was thinking about things. And it caused people to be a little suspicious, like, well, maybe some of these are pretty easy answers. Why is he thinking so hard about them? And it became a lesson in, when you're on film, you have to think about how it's going to come across to make sure that you're not inadvertently doing things that'll harm your credibility.
Right. Yeah. Because, I can imagine. Well, he's an interesting guy. I mean, it's a small tangent. He's a fascinating individual.
Yep.
I can remember him just from being a kid, right? This guy, Microsoft, you understand, he's the richest guy in the world for some time, right? And to where it is now, and he's somehow mired in the conspiracy field world. Now he's got himself caught up in there, and nobody really knows where to put him. But that shiftiness and that thoughtfulness, it's a small tangent, but I'm curious, because you've probably met so many high functioning, incredible individuals that are running these companies, and I'm curious about the threads that piece them together. But like, these guys, they're so highly analytical, so highly thoughtful, and like, to be nitpicking at these little words. Do you find that these I don't even know what to call them, these high-end CEOs or owners, I guess, of these companies, these guys that are running these multi-million or multi-billion-dollar companies. Are they all alike?
So they're not. And and let me say two things. The interesting thing about Bill Gates and the conspiracy theories, it always fascinated me.
Okay.
Because when I was doing that case, there were so many in the world of academia that were so pro, Apple, great product, and anti Bill Gates. And he's, I think everybody knows, one of the more generous people, billionaires that we know of with the Gates Foundation. And was a visionary and was loved by the people who worked for him. And I always thought it was a very bad rap, and I never quite understood it. When you ask about common threads, it depends on what industry. So if you think about somebody where it's a CEO of a major corporation, sort of brick and mortar, and it's almost a political position, those traits are going to be very different. I mean, I look at politicians and I always say, you can talk about, it's almost like a soccer player, right? You need to have a certain degree of speed. You need to have a certain degree of technical ability and intelligence and all that. But when you think about the defining characteristics of the political sort of genre, I always look at it and I say, it's the kind of person that could disagree with you and tell you you're wrong and you still like them. And that's a really difficult trait. It's a natural trait that some people have and some don't. And so when you think of those kind of things, and I've been in boardrooms of, massive companies where it's the old school oil companies and healthcare and things like that, where that's sort of a common trait. If you're talking about finance, it's a very different world, right? A lot more aggressive, a lot more to the point. If you're talking about software, it's usually quirkier folks who are extraordinarily bright who came up with the idea in the first place. When I try and think of, is there a common thread through all of them? What I've probably found through all of them is, on top of all the other basic sort of traits, is there's an obvious hardworking element and a matter of prioritizing things. And people always talk about balance in life. And I think when you get to certain levels and you really are passionate about something, that's a misnomer. It's a fallacy. It doesn't exist. You only have 24 hours in a day. So all you're really doing is taking away from one thing and giving it to another. And so when you look at some of the CEOs of these companies that are really successful across the board, most of them, and I think this is true if you look at athletes as well, most of them make what they're doing, that job, sort of the first, second, and third priority in their lives. So when you think about what that means, it means the next most important thing in your life is like number 4 on the list. It has issues, creates issues in private lives, but it's, I think, that kind of focus that I see is usually common among, even across industries.
I mean, it does make sense, right? Because you're not going to be able to create what he's created without some sort of insane laser focus.
Right.
And I would imagine that displays out across all these sectors, whether it's finance, tech world, software, all that stuff. And so it makes me also, and you're mentioning being in these boardrooms, I have a question because you are from New Jersey or New York?
Originally Long Island.
Originally from Long Island, okay.
Now I live in New Jersey. My wife dragged me to New Jersey.
Okay. Yeah, it's funny. Being a Kansas guy, I don't know those little wars. Our only war is with St. Louis, or like if you're in the Kansas side, Kansas, Missouri, that whole thing. We have the Chiefs now, so I don't really have to say anything. We're the best at everything. Everybody knows this now. But you've been here, then you've been in this New York, let's say, area for forever. Have you ever met Donald Trump?
I have.
Okay. What was that like?
So I don't want to overstate it. I met Donald Trump for about, I don't know, maybe 90 seconds, 2 minutes.
Sure.
He was a client of the first law firm that I worked at. He has been on the other side of many colleagues who I've worked with. When I met him, so I've heard a lot of stories, but all sort of hearsay. But
yeah, sure.
When I met him, it was again a 90-second encounter. He was with his wife, and he was pleasant and smiling and affable and went out of his way. I mean, he didn't need. It wasn't. It was sort of a little bit of happenstance, and he smiled, said hello, shook my hand, and that was
cool.
really the sum and substance of it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's interesting because I know he's a New York figure, right? New York is a new thing in my life, right? Over the last 5-6 years, I've been here and, kind of been getting into what's going on here and having friends here and doing things here all the time. And I just find it fascinating just in general because he was well known before being more well known on a incredible world stage.
Yeah, I mean, you know as much as I do about him, but when I think of him having lived here, it's sort of probably 3 different sort of eras, right? I mean, it was the Donald Trump as the real estate New Yorker who was very much known, and then sort of moved into reality TV, and now into politics.
We've had on several intelligence officers on the channel. We've had some guys that worked at the Pentagon.
Yep.
We had Andrew Bustamante, who is fairly well known nowadays, running around through podcasts and stuff like this a couple times. In these corporate things, I've always wondered, because Google, let's say, and I don't know if you've had any relationships with Google or any of these massive companies, there's this weird blend that has to happen, right? And it's one of these things is that, like, if you look at a country like Russia or even China, where we know that the government is very well entrenched in, some of their corporate dealings, they have to kind of say hello, and give them the okay. Whereas you look at America and we have this massive private space, which is supposed to have a separation from the government to some degree, although they clearly have to have relationships. Be going on. Elon Musk is getting, grants and things from the government in order to function. And
right.
Have you ever had to deal with any of the intelligence services, or any of them, or do you wonder what their involvement is in? Because when we're talking about, we're going to talking about a Johnson & Johnson case, right? That is billions of dollars.
Right.
And just as a guy who's just a commoner, when there are billions of dollars involved, and that can sway industries, it would be hard for me to believe that the government can't be watching and wanting to influence stuff like that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. My interactions with the government, when you talk about the information, and intelligence sort of arms of it, I've brushed up against them. We've had cases with involvement with the FBI, but predominantly, the SEC, which governs the stock markets, have had a lot of interactions with the SEC. And various agencies like that, regulatory agencies. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't think that the government. I always, when people start with thinking who's manipulating, I know that's not quite your question, but when you think about that, I always go back to, look, I am involved literally in some of the biggest cases in the country, and I've been involved in very landmark cases and big cases. And even as a major participant going through it, you never know how it's going to come out. And so the idea that somebody can put together a Machiavellian conspiracy sort of, plan together is probably not realistic. It's just too hard to pull off in the real world. There are too many variables and there's too many things that have to fall in place. But yeah, of course the government's watching, and can they be influenced? They can be influenced through donations, right? I mean, that's how it happens. You get lobbyists and you pay lobbyists a lot of money, and the lobbyists take out, politicians to dinner. And that's traditionally how people think about, short of, outright bribery.
Sure.
That's how they think about governments being influenced. And governments certainly, lots of cases, whether it's the Microsoft case where they got involved, and in a lot of cases, especially around the markets, at least in my experiences, around the markets, when things happen, the government steps in. But when you're dealing with major issues that affect swaths of the population, absolutely the government's interested, like the J&J case,
right,
where they said, look, this is affecting tens and tens of thousands of people now, but it's setting a precedent for things that will affect millions. And so we're going to get involved, and we're going to make sure that nothing here seems out of step.
Can you explain that case?
The J&J case?
Yeah.
Yeah. So J&J, and I'm going to be careful because it's still going on, but what I'll tell you is certainly public. So J&J is accused of, J&J manufactured, one of its subsidiaries manufactured baby powder.
Okay.
And baby powder has talc in it. Talc is a mineral that comes out of the ground. When people go in and dig talc out, there are minerals next to it that sometimes they pull up with it and they try and sift it out. One of those minerals is asbestos. So they'll grab a bunch of talc. Some asbestos may get caught up in it, maybe not. And then it'll get sifted out. And the argument is twofold, that there's something inherent about talc, or that when you have baby powder, there are trace amounts in certain containers of asbestos that are, when people are using it over time, that are causing cancer. And I won't go into the two primary types of cancer, but that's the general gist of it. There are currently, depending on who you ask and which cancers you include, allegedly 90,000 claimants claiming that Johnson & Johnson baby powder caused their cancer.
Cancer in babies?
In people. So if you think about somebody who has been using every day for 30 years, they got up and after the shower, they used J&J baby powder and they put it on their body. And then all of a sudden they were diagnosed with cancer.
Okay.
And they are saying it was because of the baby powder. And there's a big fight over causation with one side saying it caused it, the other side saying not. And that we call a mass tort, right? When you think about tobacco. They knew, and the allegation is J&J knew this. They knew that this was causing cancer and they kept it on the market.
Okay.
When you think about tobacco, allegedly they knew that the tobacco was causing harm. They kept selling it, and then they wound up having to settle for billions and billions of dollars. Those are mass torts. Somebody knowingly pollutes a river and it causes an entire town to get sick. And so what typically happens in a mass tort like that is you get a plaintiff's lawyer who gathers up all the people who have similar, it's all the same cause, and you have a class action and you sue the company. And the company is usually embroiled in litigation for years and years and years. And if you, according to what J&J will argue, the verdicts can be inconsistent. So you will go and try a case and somebody will say, no, I don't, because it harmed one person in Oklahoma and another person in Texas. The person in Oklahoma will sue in Oklahoma and they'll say, nope. The jury will say, no, it didn't cause your injury. Texas will say the opposite. One place will give you $10,000 in damages. The other will say, well, with punitive damages to punish them, we're going to give you $10 million. So those are the kinds of things that J&J argues. And I don't subscribe to that. There is consistency. Our system works, but there is some inconsistency. But in any event, it goes on for many, many years and can really cripple a company. And so what J&J did is they said, all right, J&J is worth $500 million. It's one of the richest companies in the world. Better credit rating than the United States. Or at least it was. I'm not sure if it still is. The subsidiary that was producing baby powder was worth about $60 or $70 billion. They went to Texas, where they have a specific statute that allows you to take a company and just move all of its assets to one place and all of its liabilities to another place. So they went to Texas, they formed a new company they called Legacy Talc Litigation, LTL, and they moved all the litigation to that. Everybody who was suing for baby powder went into that company. All of the assets, Aveeno, all these other big brands that we all know, went into a different company that moved back to New Jersey and kept selling all the brands. They then took that company that just had the litigation. They went to North Carolina, where they thought the court would be best for it, and they filed a lawsuit there. My firm got involved. We moved that lawsuit to New Jersey. We litigated the issue. We beat them. We went. They filed again. We beat them, and now there's a third filing, which I can talk about that in a little bit. But the issue, and this is what the regulators get involved in, the lawmakers, is when you go into bankruptcy, what happens is effectively you get a person to say, I'm going to do a big chart, I'm going to hear it once, and I'm going to estimate all the claims. Right. So it's just one person, typically maybe a couple, but usually one person who just decides, if you've had this kind of cancer for this long, you get X. If you've had this kind of cancer for that long, you get Y. It takes the guessing out, it's quick, and within 2 years, you're done. And theoretically, right, most people would say that the company winds up spending less litigation, less time, and it can move on because of the way that bankruptcy is set up. Because remember, when you're in bankruptcy, it's a company that's usually dying. And so you have to it may be a little bit of rough justice, but you have to do things quickly, because otherwise, if you wait too long, the company will disappear.
It's gone.
So the issue is this, really simply. If you've got a company worth $70 billion. I get that they want to use the bankruptcy process, but that's only for bankrupt companies. How can you possibly allow a company that's really worth $70 billion into bankruptcy? And there's arguments on both sides. We lost at trial the first time, handled the appeal. We, with a couple other counsel, we won. They filed again. We beat them in a trial. We beat them on appeal. And now they filed in Texas on a slightly different theory. But that's really what the lawmakers were upset about. We get it. If you are a company that makes asbestos and now you're bankrupt because of this and you've got no money, go into bankrupt and let the bankruptcy process handle who gets paid how much from whatever's left. But if you're a company that isn't bankrupt, should you be allowed to use the bank, even if we agree the bankruptcy system is better, which obviously is a debate about, should you be allowed to voluntarily go into bankruptcy? We, for many years, have argued, no, you can't. It's not a voluntary menu choice. You actually have to be bankrupt. That's what the Third Circuit ultimately found. You need some degree of imminent financial distress. You have to be in financial distress imminently in order to access it. And that's kind of what it's about.
If the tobacco companies knew, which I think we know conclusively, right, that they understood that. I mean, there are all sorts of other industries, right, that knew of that stuff. And if Johnson & Johnson knew, I just always find it so, I mean, I put myself somewhere, like you consider yourself not a conspiracy theorist. I consider myself open. I consider myself to say that there's probably, people do conspire. We conspired to make this podcast today, right, by agreeing to some things. There's absolutely no way that every conspiracy theory is true. That's ludicrous. And I think because of the current state of things, and you'll see where I'm headed with this because I'm just curious on your thought. It's as if, do you remember the 90s and early 2000s where there was the sentiment just past 9/11 was one with which we didn't really question a whole lot of things from the government. Something changed in these last few years to which no one believes anything.
Right.
It's to the point that you've got conspiracy theories that are clearly not true, and some that are also that have some weight that should probably be dug through, and that we may not know of, but that hold some weight. And so one of the new things that's topical, let's say right now, you obviously know because I'm not sure where exactly this United Healthcare fiasco happened, but not too far from where we're at.
Yeah, just blocks.
Yeah. And the sentiment, right? I was in Europe at the time when it happened, but the sentiment across the nation was something that was probably shocking, and was shocking actually to the people in Europe that were talking to me about it.
Yep.
Because someone died, but the sentiment around the country became, well, because of and why is it?
Well, this massive corporation, right? People feel right by insurance companies and things like this.
From where you're at now, from working with all of these, how do you see that? Like an issue like this? Do we have a problem in the country? Do you consider this? We've got this massive insurance company that's supposed to be taking care of, the people, to the point where the CEO can be blatantly murdered in the street, and then no one feels. People almost feel as if it's justice. People are okay with it. Like, what happened here? What's going on? How do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, what worries me most about that is I look at those issues as very separate.
Okay.
There is the issues you can have with insurance companies, and there is taking matters into your own hand and committing murder. And there should never, and some people have done an okay job about this, but too many people have blurred it, which was, I think, the reaction that was shocking to a lot of people. It's okay to, not be a fan of the insurance companies. I don't know if you saw, I'm trying to remember the John Grisham movie. I think it was The Rainmaker, where they went up against an insurance company. And that movie was about a policy by the insurance companies to deny. Because if you, in the first instance, automatically deny claims, most people are kind of, they don't know what's going on. They don't have the wherewithal to challenge it. And so you'll get out of paying a lot of claims that you actually have to pay out on. Yeah. So like I was saying, when you think about just bifurcating and it's okay to be angry, but the idea of the lawlessness of people murdering somebody, a CEO because they're not happy with the company, that's just the fact that people were embracing that or even remotely considering that okay was pretty astounding.
Do you, and given that you already stated that you're not a conspiracy theorist, doesn't it, you didn't see the video?
I did not see the video.
Now the video, I saw the whole video, the whole entire thing of what was there. It's depicted in the same way, I say depicted as if that's not real. It looks as if the way we depict hits in the movie.
Right.
I mean, through and through. And I've seen some people go down, some people with military experience. You know, we have a podcast here just a little bit with someone who's been involved and who's working with Homeland Security and doing some other stuff and obviously military experience. And it looked like a hit, you know? And so the questions right now, and there's so many questions behind this thing, and I mean, it's going to be a while before we go, but it's being portrayed as one,
right,
as a lone gunman upset. You know, I don't know all the facts. I clearly have not gone through, but I know that that's at least one aspect that has been put forth. And on the other end, it seems like someone told me the other day that the CEOs of many other insurance firms have been either under more increased security as well as taking their names off of their websites, you know, because of the sentiment, which maybe was unknown or kind of known. It was always bubbling. I mean, it's bubbling until something like this happens. And so I wonder if this is going to be an isolated event or if this is some sort of weird trend that we're going to see of retaliation from people wanting to step up and do something about it because there's always a problem, and there's always going to be a problem when things get too separated, when too many people feel, you know, that there's an issue and they feel weak. Someone or something has to happen. So I don't know that it's going to be a trend.
Yeah. Look, I worry about it. I mean, what you're describing sounds less like a conspiracy, more like a revolution, right? I mean, it's
right. They happen like that too. They're kind of conspiratorial in that sense.
And you know, look, I worry that people are going to look at this and the fact, and I think sentiment is changing. I think more and more people are saying, look, it's okay not to like the insurance companies. It's okay to have gripes with them. It's okay to lobby and write letters and and talk to your local, you know, officials and congressmen and tell them, please do something. That's all fine. But the idea that you can be unhappy with a company or its process and people will support you in shooting the CEO is insane. And so I hope that it doesn't set an example. I hope that sentiment is clear enough after people have a little bit of time to reflect on it, that it's clear enough that this is not okay. We don't want vigilantism. We don't want lawlessness. Now, look, what you were saying about, you know, the larger societal issue is something different. You know, there are lots of arguments you can make. I mean, when you look at what's happening in society and the disenfranchisement of so many people, and I don't mean just in voting, but just in society and the widening gap between the haves and the have-nots, that's concerning. I mean, I look at it and I say that the consolidation of wealth is alarming. It's even among the wealthy, it's consolidating into a few. And you know, it's kind of like the Home Depot model, right? Let's just get rid of everybody else. One person, one entity. And that's happening with people. And that is alarming. And you hope that we can reverse course and understand what this country is built on and what gives people incentives to work hard and the idea that you can work hard and achieve. But again, I think, you know, the idea that we're going to in any way condone people going out and killing CEOs. I mean, what are they going to kill? Politicians? They'll kill prosecutors. They'll kill judges. It's just it's mind-boggling.
The thing that is so interesting to me though about it is that I feel as if, you know, you mentioned you can talk to your congressman. You talk to I think people feel like that's just kind of bullshit.
Right.
That's part of I think that's what leads to this is that, you know, they were calling. And people do feel like they're screaming, and people do feel like they're suffering, and I feel like that's what gets this, right? That's what gets this, and that's what gets people supporting this, is that they don't feel that avenue of, I call my congressman, because they feel like, and I think this is the current sentiment, and like I said, where everyone is pretty much against, politicians are bought, they're lobbying, or they're this, and that is the common man's feeling that they're not with, my congressman doesn't have my best interests at heart. And so when it gets to that, that's when I think you have this, whether it's good or bad or not. It's clearly not good because shooting the one person or one CEO or bringing about isn't going to solve the greater systemic issue that may be there. I think they're connected, but I think that the problem is that these people don't see any avenue out.
Yeah.
And I don't think, and one of the big things that's really interesting is you're working with some of these big giant companies who I don't understand how, lobbyists work in their entirety. I understand I'm a company. I would like something to happen. I can use my money, influence with a certain congressman to help move things. That's not available to me. Right. And if I want some sort of zoning law change, or if I want something happening in my little area, I think that's where I really see the issue. I don't know how that gets solved unless people start to feel like the people that are in power have their best interests at heart in a certain way. This election cycle was actually interesting, and very much so because I was in Europe for the entire time, and it reminded me, in its importance at least, of what was going on I was in Serbia when Obama became president, and that was this whole hope, right? That he ran on that hope change, and there was this big and now this is another one where it's just like, it wasn't as I don't know if I would want to call his hope, but it's a make America great again type thing is his thing. But that's it's kind of hope, and it's funny to watch. I'm not a very politically inclined individual, right? I would put myself independent. I could find things from the Democratic and the Republican side with which I love, hate, whatever. I'm per issue,
right?
But I just find it hard to see how this changes in the best way.
Yeah. I mean, what you're latching onto is the difficulty when you think about any system. No system's ever survived, right? I mean, the Roman Empire, and it's one after another, and it's because everything's always in flux, and it's great, and it's ambitious, and it's working to something good, and you get there and you enjoy it, and then all of a sudden it starts not being so good for certain people, and then it goes in the other direction. And I don't know if there's something sustainable that satisfies everybody, right? Because everybody wants to achieve and everybody wants to improve, and when there's no hope, and people start saying to themselves, all right, the ladder's not there anymore. It doesn't matter how hard I work. Then they have nothing to lose. But you can talk about capitalism and whether there should be more socialism. And those are all open debates, and who knows what the right answer is. But there are things people can do, but the idea that it's some sort of wake up call to shoot a father and husband who's a CEO of a company walking up 6th Avenue is astonishing to me. I mean, what politicians want is to stay in power.
For sure.
And if the people say, if we don't like what you're doing, we're going to vote you out, they're going to change what they're doing. That is what drives them. There are lots of law firms. If you hope, and it happens. If people believe that the insurance company is automatically denying claims and doing this, and just hoping that, a whole swath of people drop out, you hope that people bring cases and that it gets exposed. And when it gets exposed, they get hit with these massive punitive damages. Johnson & Johnson, they contest the validity of it, but Johnson & Johnson, in one case, it was like a $2 billion judgment against them in one of these cases.
But does that actually hurt them?
$2 billion is not nothing. And when $2 billion, even for a company that's worth $500 billion. I think I said that.
You said $500 million. Don't worry. We'll change it. We'll change it. We'll change it. I caught it. Don't worry.
Okay. Yeah. They're worth $500 billion.
Yeah.
So $2 billion is not nothing. And when it signals, and look, one of the driving issues for them was this is one case with, I can't remember how many, it was 6 or 10 plaintiffs. If that happens in one case, that could happen in another 10 cases. And now we're talking about a massive amount of money, even for Johnson & Johnson. And remember, not everybody's J&J. So, $2 billion to most companies is a lot of money on its own.
In theory, then, so imagine, let's say I become a billionaire overnight and I have somewhere between, I don't know, 10, $20 billion. Is that, now, in your seat and where you've been, would that be enough for me to then just go change? I could just start lobbying laws and things like that. Would I be able to just start changing the world in the way that I want the world to be through that money and influence
Sure.
You believe that I could hire a law firm, hey, let's start working on this way I want to shape the world, and I could just do it. Is that possible?
So let me caveat this by noting I'm not an expert in lobbying.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean that's a lot of money, and if you're willing to spend it, of course you can. You can have, look, if you start having events at your home for state senators during re-election, or for the people running for governor, and you have enough events and you give a decent amount of money, you're going to have a channel to
Meaning that I have to donate to their election, though. Aren't there rules?
Well, you can donate to their election.
Okay.
You can host events where you bring other people together to host. You can, again, I don't know the election laws terribly well. It's not my area, but there are limits to what you can donate. But you can donate through different means, and I believe you can set up PACs and then plant seed money in a PAC that goes out and advocates. But when you help politicians, you typically create, and you can see it at the local, sort of the state level as well. You create a direct line to those politicians, and so now you have somebody's ear.
Right.
Is that enough to get them to do what you want?
Maybe not.
Maybe not. But that's a start. And then you get into companies who are paying a lot of money to lobbyists. And the lobbyists are folks that sit in Washington, D.C., and it's their jobs to maintain relationships with politicians and to bring politicians together and say, listen, this industry who's paying me, it's not always a company, sometimes it's an industry.
How does that work?
An industry gets together, forms a PAC.
Meaning a bunch of companies together.
A bunch of companies in the same industry. So if you are... I'm going to this is hypothetical. I don't want you to think this is anything real, but if you sell grain in the Midwest and you're one of the 8 big producers of grain and you're worried about another country coming in and buying up land and starting to box you out of a market, for example, you'll start lobbying to say, hey, put tariffs on, put restrictions on foreign ownership of lands that compete against agriculture. And when you get enough people together and you can pay these and so all 8 will get together, put all the money in one pool, and they will have an industry lobbyist for that grain manufacturing industry. That lobbyist will go and advocate for their positions with politicians.
I mean, that is fascinating. But it once again brings me back to the point of like this guy from Kansas who maybe I want to, fight against you guys. I'm out. My
much harder. It's much harder.
Much harder. That's an under.
Your voice will not get
heard
the same weight.
I like it
in numbers, right? What you can do is you can solicit others to your view and use the freedom of speech and convince people that there's something grievous going on and get them to get together. When you sign a petition and send a petition to that, you may not have $1 billion. But if you send a petition with 50,000 names on it, it starts to get attention.
Right. Until me, the guy who became a 10 billion or 20 billion overnight, goes to the guy who's running and gives him.
Well, but yeah.
I give him 100 grand.
And at that point,
and it's over, right?
Politicians have a choice, right? Which is the more influential here? Because I can only do something so much, but if I'm going to get hung out to dry and I'm not going to get reelected, what's the point? Because that's the ultimate goal.
But this hypothetical that we're throwing out there right now, I find more interesting because in class I didn't get this breakdown. That's one of the things. We're doing a lot of work in the language arena right now. We have a language course that's actually coming out here in just a few days. It's probably out by the time this is coming out. And in school, and I think we talked about this. What did you take in school? Did you take a foreign language?
I
in high school.
In high school and middle school, I studied Spanish.
High school and middle school. So that means you had at least 4 years?
Yeah, plus all the games on Univision.
Yeah, exactly. But you wouldn't consider yourself to be speaking fluent Spanish, or at least from schooling.
From schooling, I'm pretty good with languages.
All right.
So había veces en que yo podía hablar español muy bien.
Okay.
Ahora es difícil recordar palabras. But, so there was a time when I could speak it.
Cool.
When I was playing in Israel, I learned a lot of Hebrew, and in the way my own brain works, felt like every word I was learning in Hebrew was supplanting the Spanish word. So when I start thinking in a language,
that happens.
It would shift. But I could speak it pretty well, but probably
Okay.
not from just
Probably not from the school.
And my school, the high school I went to was the language classes were immersive, so there was no English spoken in the class.
See, now
and
that
helped a lot.
is a huge difference.
Yeah.
And so that's where we're going, because most people aren't having this. They're having, 3 times a week or
Can't
4
learn it
times,
that way.
45 minutes of this, and they're spending most of the time in English. And the reason I'm going there is because, just this conversation, this hypothetical, is more valuable to me than the idea of you vote for who you need, but they don't tell me about the influence of the money or who's behind there. You don't learn about that until you're out, right? And so you've got this model of the world. We never have, right? Us being humans and one person. You only have a model of the world. And if your model of the world is completely horrendous, you're going to have some issues when you're trying to make real things happen.
Right.
The closer you are to reality, even though you're not going to get 100%, will allow you to traverse the world in a better way.
Yeah.
And so knowing about this, which is perfect because I have written down here, I'll throw another name out there. Have you ever met Peter Thiel? Are you allowed to say if you've met Peter Thiel?
I have not met him personally.
Okay.
When I worked on the Gawker case, he was reportedly heavily involved.
Yes. Yes.
I will.
I've read a book on
it. I will say
it.
reportedly in the public, it was reported that he was funding Hogan's lawsuit.
Is that not considered? Now, I read a book on that. I think the book was by Ryan Holiday, who it was a fascinating case. And I'll explain. You can fix where my gaps are because it's been a while since I read the book. But if I remember right, the Gawker case happened. Gawker, for people that don't remember, was this website or let's say journalistic enterprise that was reporting on all sorts of things, from the torrid affairs of, celebrities to other things that people probably didn't want, to know. But of course, whatever, like TMZ did. And I think at the time, and this must have been, a little more than 10 years ago, right? 14, 15, I feel like it was 2009, 7, 10.
No, it was probably a little after that. I would say it was...
Was it 2012?
It was later, probably 2015.
Really? Okay. All right. Well, that's, even better. I mean, I read the book
Give or
probably
take.
a couple of years ago.
13, the Boleo versus Gawker, was that the one?
Yeah, and then it probably took a little bit of time to get through. And then I think the bankruptcy was probably
Found
20.
a verdict 2016.
Yeah.
Found a verdict 2016. Okay. And the way that the book portrayed the entire story was one in which Gawker kind of outed Peter Thiel as gay, and that was well known within the Silicon Valley, but of course just kind of these open secrets, and no one really paid any attention to it. I wouldn't know about it not being involved in Silicon Valley, right? Nor would care. They outed it. He kind of had an axe to grind. And then the Hulk Hogan case, which was like, it's super convoluted, and so I won't bother. But in any case, if I'm to understand what happened correctly, Peter, after being, this is allegedly, I guess I should say, as the book went on, was waiting for a time with which Gawker was going to have a case brought against it that he could fund, being a billionaire, and could eventually, I guess basically get his revenge on them for doing what they did. Let's just say that's the way it's portrayed.
Yep.
And he funded that whole thing. And so the Hulk Hogan case came up, and it appeared that they had done something wrong. And him and I don't know whoever else it was that they were speaking to in the book realized that was the right thing, and then they funded his entire fees, his legal fees, I guess, throughout the entire thing. And then a verdict happened, and it essentially shut them down. And so he basically shut down this massive entity. And Peter Thiel is also another guy who does a whole lot of this lobbying and stuff himself, which I think having at one point given to the Democratic Party and also the Republican Party and vice versa, whatever, I guess, fixes your means, right? And that's kind of what one would do. It was interesting because within that whole thing, I didn't know that he was born in Germany.
Peter Thiel was.
Peter Thiel.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
He was born in Germany. As a matter of fact, he speaks he moved over to America very, very early. And he speaks German with a heavy American accent. But in any case, that Gawker, I was glued to the book. I mean, it was stunning. It was, it is one of those Machiavellian moves that you would assume couldn't happen. You had some involvement in there, though, in that. So you had an interesting viewpoint. Yeah,
I mean, so we got involved when it went into bankruptcy. So the Hulk Hogan case in Florida was litigated separately. The underlying, First Amendment case. And what happened was when he had a judgment, ultimately the judgment against Hulk Hogan, Terry Bollea is his real name, was about 140 million, if I recall correctly. And they filed for bankruptcy. And as soon as they filed for bankruptcy, I actually ran in and submitted TRO papers to say, all right, there's now a bankrupt debtor. You need to freeze enforcement of that $140 million judgment, because that's what happens in bankruptcy. When a company goes into bankruptcy, everything gets frozen until we figure out where are all the assets, bring them into a big pot, who gets paid what and when. And so I actually went in, argued that TRO, won that TRO, and then defended Nick Denton's deposition and was heavily involved.
Wow. Yeah, that case just by and of itself was actually one that didn't seem real to me.
The most astonishing thing from my perspective about that case was, like I said, I've worked on very high profile cases that are sort of Wall Street Journal, front page of the Wall Street Journal, whether it's Microsoft or Samsung or any of these others, J&J, Airbus and EADS. But you kind of, it's the kind of stuff where sometimes it infiltrates the mainstream media. And sometimes it's big enough where your friends know about it and they've heard of it and you can talk to them about it. Gawker, I've never seen anything like it. Gawker, I remember doing things in that case, and it was like there were 3 people in the world knew that it had just happened.
Yeah.
And I was one and a judge was another. And then before I could talk to my partners about it and tell them what happened, it was on Wynn's News.
Wow.
And it was just astonishing.
Yeah.
The interest and the quickness with which things were reported, it was just, it had people enveloped.
Yeah, that's one of those things. And nothing ever really came, it died. I mean, TMZ exists as it is, but nothing came back. I remember that. It was a different thing.
Yeah, it got bought by Univision at the end of the bankruptcy. It got sold to Univision. That was the deal. He worked out something. He stayed out of personal bankruptcy, I think.
Okay.
Or if he entered it, he got out of it. And yeah, I don't think it ever went anywhere.
Well, another one of these things, because we talked, I know you've got involvement in the FTX BlockFi whole. Could you maybe explain to people what BlockFi was or what?
Sure.
Yeah, it would be better from your end. Yeah. I know my.
So BlockFi was a crypto bank. That's what it was.
Okay.
If you think about Citibank, they loan money, they invest money, and it's dollars. BlockFi loaned money, invested money, and it was crypto. FTX was a Sam Bankman-Fried. It was his company. FTX was an exchange. So you can take money and go trade it. Buy stock,
buy some crypto.
This was almost an exchange where you could buy and exchange and sell crypto. And there were, as you know, lots of allegations that it was a Ponzi scheme and there was fraud and there was misrepresentations. And what happened to BlockFi is it had loaned, probably in total, I don't remember, maybe $1 billion or so. It had loaned a lot of money to an FTX affiliate, and it had put some of its own money. Remember, people deposited money in it like a bank.
Yep.
They would take that money and earn interest by investing it on the FTX exchange. And then FTX collapsed. Sam Bankman-Fried went to jail, or I think he's in jail.
Yeah, I think so.
And they were left out $1 billion. And so they filed for bankruptcy. And it was interesting, there were issues about what happened to money that there was some money they had gotten paid back before the bankruptcy. So FTX was trying to claw that back as a fraudulent transfer. There was issues over the value of their collateral. So when you think about the intricacies of litigation, we wanted to value the collateral. When they made a loan to FTX's affiliate, there was collateral, and that was an FTX token called FTT.
Sure.
And there was an issue over what was FTT tokens worth. We wanted them to be worth a lot of money, representing BlockFi, because the more that they're worth, the more we get back. FTX wanted them to be worth nothing, because then they don't have to pay people money. And so there was this fight over, listen, if you're going to litigate with us, we're going to litigate the value of FTT. You may be able to get something done in your own bankruptcy, but if we litigate this, it's being litigated. And so there are a lot of, there are a lot of interesting dilemmas involved on both sides. Do we want to fight them on it, or do we want to give up? Because otherwise we're going to have this fight publicly, and it's winner take all kind of thing, as happens in litigation. So there's a lot of interesting issues involved in that.
What, you've dealt with a lot of big banks?
Yep.
What, I'll go to the personal and human aspect of it too, because we've been talking a lot about the humans, the sentiment of the people.
Yeah.
Bankers aren't liked at many, across many times throughout history, actually. Right. Bankers have been, I guess it puts us back in the conspiratorial space, allegedly said to have fund certain, if I'm funding a certain king, or if I'm funding this, and bankers are involved in this, right. You can go down that route and find all sorts of people who believe certain things, and some to be true, and some probably to be just complete speculation. When you've dealt with these bankers, of which I don't think I know very many. I do have some friends, actually, that's not true, but maybe on the lower end. But some of these older generation bankers, do you give any credence to the sentiment of them being the evil, behind the scenes manipulators? Or do you see it as, even if you don't see it as manipulators, do you think that they have more power than what the average person would probably understand?
So I over the course of my career at various stages and levels of seniority, I've done a lot of work for Goldman Sachs and a lot of work for Bank of America and
sorry to interrupt, but like, who would be the most powerful person in a Goldman Sachs? What's that title? Is it a CEO? What are they called? Is there an owner to
I believe it's either a chairman or a CEO.
A chairman, okay.
But they're structured where they have partners. So the MDs are what they call their partners, and the MDs typically are the most senior and powerful people. And then within the MDs, you have executive committees, which gives a little bit more power, and then ultimately I think a CEO.
And you would be dealing with all of.
So it depends on when in my career it was and what the cases were. But I've dealt with, always, partner up, but various levels.
What sort of, as someone who's never met these types of people?
When you talk about bankers, that means a lot of different things.
Sure.
So when I think of bankers, I'm thinking of investment banking, investment banks from Goldman Sachs and Citibank, to Bank of America and JP Morgan. They are smart, hardworking people trying to figure out deals. So when a company comes and says, I have a great idea, and I need money, I need financing, can you figure out where in the market you can go sell my idea and raise financing? To, hey, we have cash sitting around, who would be a strategic partner with ours where we could partner and merge or acquire a company? That's what I think of bankers. And I don't think of any remotely evil. I mean, I think they're usually very bright, very hardworking, and do a lot of great things. When you look in the trading world, where you talk about hedge funds and private equity funds that are pooling massive amounts of money and then investing, sometimes you talk about the consolidation. The money they earn is astonishing. Yeah. But I don't see anything evil about that. I've never sort of gotten that sense.
That vibe. So given that, you can probably find within any organization a bunch of people who essentially are good, right? And who are fixed on their goal and on their goal of wanting to figure out deals. But could it be, and I'm just throwing this out there, could it be the issue in what we are seeing in the sentiment against the bankers is because they are only concerned about the next big deal, getting this, and what's happened is because they're singular focused, I think we were talking about this before, when you're singularly focused on one thing, you have to leave something else. And what gets left behind may be the common dude, the lower stuff like this and stuff. And so maybe there is not an intent to keep someone down. And it's a question of, it's a societal question. And maybe there's not a right answer, right? Because you don't want everyone looking at everything all the time. You need some people to pay attention. You want your doctor focused on you, not on 50 other things. Could that be then the reason the sentiment is because they don't care? Like there's always this idea of Wall Street, they don't care about us.
Yeah, when people talk about Wall Street, but again, like when you think of bankers, they are a major part of Wall Street, but they're not I don't think they're doing the things. I mean, look, they're doing mergers and acquisitions and financings. Those aren't the kind of things that people. I think what people are angry about when they talk about Wall Street, and I don't know. I mean, is that there's a lot of money there, and people are taking the money and not redistributing it, and people are working on Wall Street and making lots and doing things for companies, and it's not helping. If you help Home Depot grow, you may be harming mom and pop shops. I think there's some of that maybe, but it's hard to it's hard to say.
Yeah, I mean it is obviously, and it's one of those things like you said with systems, you're gonna have a hard time making everyone happy. I'll throw this one out to you. Are you aware of the common idea at the moment, like just like the housing market bust, that was 2008, roughly, right? And I was just moving out of the country at that time. But there is the current sentiment that we're going to have some sort of fall, some sort of bust, whether it's a black swan, something. This is pure speculation on your on my part. But I've been engaged in a lot of discussions with people who are successful, like yourself, in high functioning, high stakes environments. What do you think? What do you feel? Do you even get because if I'm perfectly honest, every year someone says either the world is ending
this is the year.
or this is the year, right? And eventually you're right? Something happens one year eventually. But what do you feel from that current trope?
Yeah, I'm the wrong one to ask. I feel it like other people, and you never quite know. And look, when you talk about, we talked about conspiracies before, and it's not that I don't think people get together and do bad things.
Sure.
It's the Machiavellian, like 18 different pieces falling together, and like, oh, they planned all this. That's where I start to question things. But when you raised 2008, and when you think about what happened there, in a nutshell, you had banks lending money to people who just couldn't pay it back, but they just didn't care because everything was flowing. And when they had all these bad mortgages, traders and people got together and said, well, what are we going to do about it? We'll repackage it and make it look like something that's really good and keep selling the junk to different people. And then eventually people are paying for it and it all falls apart when the mortgages come due and nobody can pay them. And so those are the kinds of things where it impacted people, and there was a cross section. But, I don't know. I mean, look, crypto is going through the roof. People kept saying it's, but
scam or this.
It's a scam. It's a Ponzi scheme, but it's $100,000 plus dollars for Bitcoin now.
Yeah.
And it's been pretty strong for quite a while. And it's hard to know. On the one hand, it feels like things are going really well, and are they going to burst? On the other hand, people are, you hear it in the news all the time, struggling to pay bills and inflation or whatever you want to call it. I think most people are feeling a crunch where, I just need more money to just live the same way I was living.
Right.
And so that suggests there's not really a burst that's coming. I mean, maybe we're slipping into slight recession, but I have no idea. And I just, so I went into law and not finance.
No, it's just, I'm piecing together a bunch of intelligent people's ideas, and maybe you can put together some sort of picture, at the end. And so on the last thing to discuss here, I actually want to know, you've had a lot of success in different endeavors, right? And you've done a lot of different things. What would you say to people who are just trying to succeed? And I'm going to put this into you in a way that hopefully you can get across. I'm an entrepreneur in by trade, I guess I should say. What sort of key qualities, if you had to, and I'm going to try to make you as concrete as possible, and I know it's hard to pull together the things that have made you successful. What would you give or say to someone if they had to get success? And you teach sometimes?
I do, yeah. I've taught at Fordham Law School for 20 years.
So how do you get across to a young 18 to 20 some odd year old kid what exactly they need to do, what sort of mentality they need to take, or what steps they need to take in order to make sure that 10 years, 20 years down the road, they have success, stability, or whatever, peace of mind, whatever it is that they're searching for? what exactly would you give them if you could break it down?
So it's tough. And let me start with a preface, because you were talking before about there's no manual to life. And I used to think about that, should we write a book that goes chapter by chapter and sort of here, at this stage of your life, you should focus on this and that. And there's this balance between paternalism, where you're kind of speaking down to people and telling them, oh, I know best and this is the way you should follow it. And letting them live their lives and letting them, and from soccer, right? I mean, you can't learn if you don't fail. You have to just, teach kids what they can in training and focus on principles and let them go out and put them into action in a game. And sometimes it works, but they have to make the decisions on their own during a game and fail and learn from it. And so that part is tricky in how much value there actually is in what you tell them. But I would say a couple things. I mean, I honestly believe, and we talked about this earlier, I honestly believe that in order to succeed, you have to be able to focus. And when you get out of college, you have the ability to focus. You want to become if you're playing soccer in college, you've got school and a social life and, a bunch of other things and soccer. And if you graduate and are lucky enough to play professionally, you can make soccer your top 3 priorities. And when you eat and what you eat and all that revolves around maximizing biorhythms for a game on Saturday. Mm-hmm. And so you can do that in the work world as well. And I think that's the kind of focus that it takes to succeed in the work world. So we're talking a little bit when you get there. And in order to be able to put in that focus, you have to do things and learn discipline, but you have to love what you're doing. And I know it sounds simple, but if you're gonna really grind and do things, which for some years are gonna be hard, you have to love what you're doing. It's not that you have to love it every second that you're doing it, but you ultimately it needs to be something that speaks to you and you have a passion for it and you love. And I think that's the first thing I'd say is figure out what that is. Because if the idea is you want to, do something and you're going to, go into medicine, but you don't really, it doesn't speak to you and it doesn't excite you, it's going to be really hard to get through med school and be a doctor. Yeah. Or at least and enjoy your life. Right. So that's, I think, the most important thing in my mind. Yeah. And before you get to that point, it's, look, enjoy life, work hard. It's, the only 2 things I've ever told my son before he gets on the soccer field, or my daughter, are play hard and have fun. That's all you can do. And as long as you sort of get used to doing that, whatever you're doing, do it as best you can. And whether you're sweeping a floor or studying for an exam, do it as best you possibly can and enjoy it. Yeah. Right.
It's almost identical to what my dad said the very first time I had a national team tryout. I believe I was going, I think I was 14, and I think I'd made the regional team, and I was headed off to go try out for the national team, right? Or they were all going to play. And the only thing he said, and obviously my dad, played for his national team of Nigeria. And the only thing he said was, number 1, try not to lose the ball. That's the easiest way to get rid of the guy. If you're constantly pissing the ball away, we don't want him. And have fun. Yep. That's it. You would think that with all his knowledge and stuff, there would be like, okay, first, but no, he's like, I've already done all this stuff. You've already trained and done all those things. Just don't shoot yourself in the foot. Yep. And then have fun. Right. And I made it, And so, I think it's a testament to him. And once again, just to say, after becoming a professional athlete, there are times where you don't like it. But if I didn't love it, I wouldn't have gone through the preseasons or the no's or the, you're not good, or you're going to sit here, or we said you were good. We traded for you, but guess what? You're not going to play, Good luck. Yeah. You got a year, right. And you have to find a way to get through this somehow. Yeah. And if you don't love it or care, grind, and we've actually been having this discussion with Kevin, you are out. Those guys quit. I wanted to be a doctor because someone else put that seed in my head, or it's an external, not going to work. Yeah. And look, you need the assets, right? And you need, when you think about your training to get to the point where you're going to a national team camp, look, I think the most important thing that you can cultivate in competitive kids is competitiveness, right? That at the end of the day, that in my mind is the single biggest feature it's important. But you had that, right? You were obviously training and competing in practice, and hopefully you had a good environment where they were letting you compete and not just yelling and telling you what to do. Of course. Yeah. But I mean, it's at that point it becomes simple. Yeah. When did your dad? How old's your dad? 70, what year is it? So 74.
Do you know the name Frank Daniels?
I don't.
So Frank Daniels played on the Nigerian national team. I don't know
when. My dad played in the 70s.
No, so he played in the late 80s, 90s.
Oh, okay.
So he played on the Nigerian national team and played for
in Nigeria or in America?
No, played club ball in Vienna in Austria.
Oh, in Austria.
A lot of interesting stories. But I roomed with him. He came to train with our team when I was playing in Israel, and they put me with it again.
Yeah. I'm sure he knows him because, as a matter of fact, my first World Cup experience was when it was here, '94. My dad took me to. But before that, the national team coach had come to eat at our house, and we had Uche Okafor, who's passed away, but was playing in Kansas City at the time. And so they had come, but little did I know that they were actually coming to check me out also as well, because they'd wanted later in my career, funny enough, Nigeria, and also when I made the U20s in the national team. We were at the World Cup, in Holland, and the national team coaches there, they were talking with him, and they were like, "Hey, what's going on? How come your son's playing for USA? You played for, let's get him on over here." So they were giving him a hard time about all that. But funny enough, later on in my career, I was on the short list for Nigeria national team call-up when it was, who was the coach? He's passed away too. Stephen Keshi. I don't know if you remember that name, but he's passed away. He was a national team coach for Nigeria. We had met, and he wanted to call me into camp. I hadn't had a full U.S. cap, so I was eligible still to go in, and then he passed away actually. But so in any case, though it's you never know with football, and that's also one of the other things is like that perseverance aspect of things, and like if you really have set yourself on this is the point that I'd like to land at, just like a plane going to Chicago, if there's some turbulence, you don't just turn around and go back to Kansas City because the plane bumped. You have to keep going.
You'll have injuries. You'll have a million people telling you no. And by the way, it's so I have so I went to Lafayette College, and I have the men's and women's team come to the firm. We've alternated the last couple of years with MLS because we have an alum who works there as well. And but I started this thing probably about 18, 19, 20 years ago. And we talk about the traits of D1 college athletes and how it helps you in business, because it's the same thing. You're up for a promotion, you don't get it. You lose something, can you get up the next morning and get right back to it? It's there's just so many things that translate from sports to
sports. I know there's a few companies. I think Enterprise or Enterprise. I'm thinking. I'm speaking French in my head. Enterprise Rent-A-Car. I think they recruit athletes. They love to recruit athletes because they have this whole. I didn't get that. Okay, who cares? Next, and move on. So anyway, this has been great. I think we'll call it here today. Maybe we'll have to come back here. I mean, we will be back at some point. Anytime. We'll have to come back and talk about some other. But it's been great.
Great.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.